On September 19, 1918, the German imperial government did something almost unprecedented in the blood history of the Great War. They filed a formal diplomatic protest, not about the British naval blockade that was starving their civilian population, not about the tanks crushing their soldiers in the mud of the Western Front, not about the poison gas that both sides had been using for 3 horrific years. No, they protested a shotgun, a simple pump-action shotgun, designed by an American engineer named John Moses Browning, the Winchester model, 1897, to American soldiers. It was known by a more colorful name, the trench broom. The Germans called it something else entirely, an inhumane weapon that violated the laws of war. Their diplomatic note was blunt. Any American soldier captured carrying one of these shotguns would be executed on sight. Think about that for a moment. In a war that had already introduced poison gas, barbed wire designed to shred human flesh, and artillery shells that could vaporize entire squads, a shotgun was the weapon that crossed the line. But here's what makes this story truly fascinating. The German protest wasn't propaganda or strategic theater. It was desperation. Because, in the confined hell of trench warfare, John Browning's impossible design had given American soldiers a weapon so devastatingly effective that it was changing the fundamental calculus of close-quarters combat. A single soldier with a trench gun could clear a bunker in seconds, could sweep an entire trench line clean before the enemy could react. The question is, how did a civilian hunting weapon become the most feared close combat tool of World War I? And why did one engineer's clever mechanical innovation a feature so simple it sounds almost stupid when you explain it give American forces an advantage that terrified the German high command? To understand that, we need to go back to 1893, to a workshop in Utah, where John Moses Browning was about to solve a problem that had stumped every other gun designer in the world. John Moses Browning, by 1893, was already a legend in firearms circles. The son of a Mormon gunsmith, he'd designed his first rifle at age 13. By his 30s, he held patents on lever-action rifles, single-shot rifles, and was in the process of inventing what would become the most successful semi-automatic shotgun in history, the Auto-5. But before the Auto, there was a different challenge, a challenge that had defeated Winchester, Remington, and every other major firearms manufacturer in America. The problem was simple to state, murderously difficult to solve. Create a pump-action shotgun that was reliable, fast, and strong enough to handle the punishment of firing heavy shotgun shells day after day. Earlier attempts had failed spectacularly. Pumps that jammed, actions that bent under pressure, designs so complex they required a machinist just to field strip them. The Spencer pump shotgun of 1882 had shown promise, but it was finicky and expensive. Christopher Spencer himself had basically given up on perfecting it. Browning approached the problem differently. Where other designers added complexity, he stripped it away. His model 1893 shotgun, produced by Winchester, featured an elegant solution. A single action bar that connected the pump forearm to the bolt. The entire mechanism was exposed underneath the gun, making it easy to clean and nearly impossible to jam with mud or debris. There was just one problem. The 1893 couldn't handle smokeless powder. Did you know that the transition from black powder to smokeless powder in the 1890s was one of the most disruptive technological shifts in firearms history? Smokeless powder generated pressures nearly twice as high as black powder, with chamber pressures spiking to over 12,000 psi. Guns designed for black powder would literally blow apart when fed the new ammunition. So in 1897, Browning went back to the drawing board. The result was the Winchester Model 1897, stronger, faster, and featuring one defect that would change the face of modern warfare. It lacked a trigger disconnector. Now, in almost any other context, this would be considered a design flaw. In modern firearms, a disconnector is a small part that prevents the gun from firing unless the trigger is released and pulled again. It's a safety feature. It ensures controlled, deliberate fire. But Browning's Model 1897 didn't have one. Whether this was intentional or an oversight is lost to history. Browning never publicly commented on it. What we do know is this: if you held the trigger down on a Model 1897 and worked the pump action, the gun would fire the instant the bolt closed. Slam fire. One continuous motion. Pump and shoot, pump and shoot, pump and shoot. A skilled operator could empty all 6 shells, 5 in the magazine, 2 + 1 in the chamber, in under 3 seconds. For civilian use, this was a novelty, a party trick, maybe useful for clearing a barn of rats. For military use in the trenches of World War I, it was devastating. But in 1897, nobody could have predicted that. The Model 1897 was marketed as a hunting and sports shotgun. It came in 8 different grades, from the basic standard model to the fancy trap grade with engraved receivers and premium walnut stocks. Barrel lengths ran from 20 to 32 inches. It was popular with duck hunters, competitive clay shooters, and lawmen who needed a reliable room-clearing weapon for 20 years. The Model 1897 was just another successful sporting gun, And then came August 1914, and the world went to hell. The trenches changed everything. By the autumn of 1914, the Western Front had transformed from a war of movement into a 450-mile-long scar of mud, wire, and concrete that stretched from the English Channel to the Swiss border. Both sides dug in, and what emerged was a new kind of warfare that no military doctrine had prepared: static, grinding, claustrophobic combat, where battles were measured in yards gained and lives counted in the thousands. The standard infantryman's rifle, the British Sling, the German Mauser, the French Lebel were magnificent weapons, accurate to 600 yards, deadly in the hands of a trained marksman, absolutely perfect for the open-field battles that generals had been planning for, and almost useless in a trench. Think about the tactical reality. Trenches were rarely more than 4 feet wide. They zigzagged in sharp traverses every 10 to 15 yards to prevent enfilade fire. Visibility was limited. Combat happened at ranges, measured in feet, not yards. When you encountered an enemy, you had maybe 1 second to react before you were in hand-to-hand combat. A bolt-action rifle in that environment, you got one shot, miss, and you're fighting with a bayonet or a shovel or your bare hands. Both sides scrambled for solutions. The Germans developed the MP-18 submachine gun, the first true SMG in history, but it didn't arrive until April 1918, too late to change the outcome of the war. They also pioneered the use of flamethrowers, which were absolutely terrifying but had a fatal flaw. The operator had to carry 35 pounds of fuel on his back, making him a massive target. Hit the fuel tank, and the operator became a human torch. The British experimented with specialized trench clubs, literal medieval weapons brought back for modern warfare, studied with nails, weighted with lead, designed to cave in a man's skull in the confined space, where a rifle was too long to swing, effectively. This was the nightmare that American forces were preparing to enter when the United States declared war on Germany on April 6, 1917. General John J. Pershing, commander of the American Expeditionary Forces, was a practical man. He'd fought in the Philippines, in Cuba, and in the punitive expedition into Mexico, chasing Pancho Villa. He understood close-quarters combat, and when his staff began planning for trench warfare, someone and history doesn't record exactly who remembered the Winchester Model 1897, and more importantly, remembered its slam-fire capability. On paper, the math was simple. A trained rifleman with a bolt-action Springfield could fire maybe 15 aimed shots per minute under ideal conditions. In the chaos of a trench assault, maybe 8 to 10. A soldier with a Model 1897 loaded with .00 buckshot could fire 6 rounds in 3 seconds. Each shell contained 9.33 caliber pellets. That's 54 projectiles downrange in the time it took a rifleman to cycle his bolt twice. In a confined trench measuring 4 feet wide and 50 feet long. The difference was apocalyptic. In September 1917, the U.S. Army placed its first official order for shotguns. They wanted them modified for military service, 20-inch barrels instead of the standard 28 or 30, a ventilated metal heat shield over the barrel, because when you're slam firing in combat, that barrel gets hot enough to raise blisters through gloves. A bayonet lug, because American doctrine demanded that every infantry weapon be capable of mounting a bayonet, even if it made no tactical sense on a shotgun. Winchester, Remington, and several other manufacturers received contracts. By spring 1918, thousands of these trench guns were shipping to France. They were issued to special assault units called trench raiders, hand-picked soldiers whose job was to go over the top in the pre-dawn darkness, penetrate enemy trenches, kill or capture as many Germans as possible, and gather intelligence before withdrawing. The first after-action reports came back in March 1918, where glowing. The 5th Infantry Division reported that shotguns were very useful in trench warfare and requested additional weapons. The 32nd, 35th, and 82nd Divisions each received 50 shotguns and immediately requested more. The 77th Division, the famous Lost Battalion, division received between 100 and 150 trench guns and used them extensively in the Meuse-Argonne offensive. Soldiers gave the weapon a variety of nicknames. Trench broom was the most common. You swept the enemy out of trenches with it. Some called it the trench sweeper or the persuader. German soldiers, when they could be convinced to talk about it, called it Die Schrotflinte des Scattergenand. They spoke of it with visceral hatred. Here's what it looked like in practice. You're a German soldier in a reinforced dugout 20 feet below the surface. It's 4:30 a.m. on a foggy May morning in 1918, somewhere in the Champagne region. You've been on watch for 6 hours. You're exhausted, half-starved from the British naval blockade, and you haven't slept more than 3 hours straight in a week. Then you hear it, the distinctive thump-thump-thump of a creeping artillery barrage walking toward your position. You hunker down, wait for it to pass. The shelling stops. Silence. This is the dangerous moment. You climb up the dugout stairs, rifle in hand, preparing to man your position before the inevitable infantry assault, and you come face to face with an American soldier carrying a shotgun. He's already pumping. You don't even have time to raise your rifle. The first blast hits you center mezzanine buckshot pellets, spreading in a pattern 2 feet wide at 10 feet distance. You're down. The soldier doesn't break stride. He's already pumping again. Your comrade behind you takes the second blast. Pump. Third. Blast into the traverse beyond. Pump. Fourth. Blast. Fifth. Sixth. 6 seconds from first contact to empty gun. 15 feet of trench cleared. 4 to 6 enemy soldiers dead or incapacitated. And here's the truly terrifying part. While you're still on the ground bleeding, he's already reloading. 6 more shells fed into the magazine tube in maybe 10 seconds if he's practiced. And then he's moving again, sweeping deeper into your trench system. This wasn't war as the German army understood it. This was extermination. Did you know that buckshot doesn't kill cleanly? Each pellet is roughly equivalent to a .32 caliber pistol round, but they don't penetrate deep. What they do is create massive surface trauma. A man hit by a full load of buckshot at close range might take 9 separate wounds across his chest and abdomen. He might survive, many did, but he'd be out of the fight immediately, screaming, going into shock. From a tactical perspective, this was actually more effective than a clean kill. A dead man is silent. A wounded man screams, bleeds, begs for help. He demoralizes everyone around him. He requires 2 or 3 other soldiers to evacuate him from the front line. One shotgun blast could remove 4 men from combat, the casualty and his stretcher bearers. The Germans noticed. By summer 1918, German intelligence reports were specifically warning units about American soldiers armed with Schrotflinten. Frontline commanders were advised to prioritize targeting any soldier carrying a shotgun. Snipers were instructed to watch for the distinctive profile of a pump action, but there was a problem with that strategy in the chaos of combat. In the smoke and confusion of a trench assault, identifying one specific weapon type was nearly impossible, and by the time you identified it, the man carrying it had already emptied his gun into your position. The German high command faced a dilemma. They couldn't stop the bleeding. Their soldiers were being slaughtered in close quarters engagements. American trench raiding parties armed with shotguns were achieving casualty ratios of 10-to-1 or better. German morale was cracking. They needed to do something, anything. And so, on September 14, 1918, the German government composed what might be the most backhanded compliment in military history, a formal diplomatic protest claiming that shotguns violated the laws of war. The German note verbalen, unsigned, diplomatic communication arrived in Washington on September 19, 1918, was addressed to the U.S. State Department and forwarded to the War Department within hours. The language was carefully chosen. The German government protests against the use of shotguns by the American Army and calls attention to the fact that according to the law of war, every prisoner found to have in his possession such guns or ammunition belonging thereto forfeits his life. Read that again. Germany was threatening to execute American prisoners of war for possession of a shotgun. This wasn't unprecedented. Both sides had made similar threats about poison, gas, and explosive bullets. But this was different. This was a threat over a weapon that was, fundamentally, just a scaled-up hunting gun. The same type of shotgun that German civilians used to hunt boar in the Black Forest. The German argument hinged on Article 23E of the 1907 Hague Convention, which prohibited arms, projectiles, or material calculated to cause unnecessary suffering. On the surface, this seems almost reasonable. Buckshot does cause terrible wounds. But here's where the German argument falls apart completely. Germany, at that exact moment, was using poison chlorine gas, phosgene gas, and mustard gas weapons specifically designed to cause prolonged, agonizing death. They were using flamethrowers that burned men alive. They were firing explosive shrapnel shells designed to fragment into hundreds of jagged metal shards that would rip through human flesh. They'd pioneered the use of saw-backed bayonets that caused horrific tearing wounds, and they were protesting buckshot. The American response, drafted by the Judge Advocate General's office and approved by Secretary of War Newton Baker, was a masterpiece of diplomatic savagery. The United States government categorically denies the usage of shotguns or shotgun ammunition is prohibited by the laws of war. The weapon in question is a standard sporting arm in common use throughout the United States for hunting and sporting purposes. The German protest appears to be based upon the effectiveness of this weapon in trench warfare rather than upon any legitimate grounds under international law. Translation: you're not mad because it's inhumane. You're mad because it works. The American response went further. It pointed out that if Germany wanted to discuss inhumane weapons, perhaps they should start by addressing their own use of poison gas, flamethrowers, and explosive bullets. It also noted, with barely concealed contempt, that Germany had repeatedly violated other provisions of the Hague Convention, including the treatment of prisoners, the bombardment of civilian targets, and the use of unrestricted submarine warfare. And then came the kicker. should Germany carry out its threat to execute American soldiers captured with shotguns. The United States will consider this a war crime and will respond with reciprocal measures against German prisoners. In other words, touch our boys, and we'll start executing yours. The threat was taken seriously. By September 1918, the United States had hundreds of thousands of German prisoners in custody, far more than Germany held American prisoners. The math was simple and brutal. Germany never carried out its execution threat. Not a single documented case exists of an American soldier being executed for possession of a trench gun. Whether this was because German frontline units ignored the order, or because High Command quietly rescinded it, we'll never know. But the diplomatic exchange revealed something crucial. The shotgun protest wasn't really about international law or humanitarian concerns. It was about fear. German soldiers feared the trench gun in a way they didn't fear rifles, machine guns, or even artillery. Those weapons were impersonal, random. You might survive a barrage by luck. You might survive a sniper by keeping your head down. But when an American assault team came over the wire carrying pump shotguns, survival wasn't about luck or tactics. It was about whether they reached your section of trench first. Lieutenant Ernst Junger, a German officer who survived the war and wrote one of the most famous memoirs of the conflict, Storm of Steel, never mentioned shotguns directly, but he described American trench raids in visceral detail. They came at us like devils, with a savagery we had not seen even from the French or British. No quarter given, no mercy asked. It was extermination warfare. Another account, from a captured German soldier interviewed by American intelligence in October 1918, was more explicit. We were told the Americans were soft, undisciplined, inexperienced. Then they came into our trenches at night with their pump guns and knives. It wasn't battle, it was slaughter. We couldn't stop them. The effectiveness wasn't just mechanical though, the slamfire capability was crucial. It was psychological. The sound of a pump-action shotgun being worked is distinctive, unmistakable. CHK. In the confined acoustic environment of a trench, that sound traveled. You could hear it coming, and if you were a German soldier in the next traverse, hearing that sound growing closer, hearing the boom of each shot, followed immediately by another CHK boom, you knew what was coming. Some Germans broke and ran. Some threw up their hands in surrender immediately. Some fought to the death. None of them stopped the trench brooms. By November 1918, American forces had integrated shotguns fully into their tactical doctrine. Squad-level tactics called for 2 shotgunners per assault team of 12 men. Their job was simple: breach the enemy position, clear the first 30 to 40 feet of trench, and create space for riflemen and grenadiers to exploit. It worked. American divisions achieved breakthrough penetrations that British and French units exhausted from 4 years of grinding. Attrition could no longer accomplish. The Musagon Offensive, the largest American operation of the war, saw extensive use of trench guns in the initial assault phases, and then, on November 11, 1918, at 11 a.m., the guns fell silent. The war was over. The story of the trench gun didn't end in 1918, when the armistice was signed. The U.S. military had procured approximately 30,000 to 35,000 shotguns from various manufacturers: Winchester, Remington, and others. The exact number is disputed in military records, but somewhere in that range. Most were Model 1897s, but some Remington Model 10s and other designs saw service as well. After the war, many were returned to storage. Some were destroyed, but a significant number remained in military armories. Waiting, they wouldn't wait long. When the United States entered World War II, in December 1941, the Model 1897 came out of storage once again. Marines in the Pacific Theater used them extensively for jungle warfare and bunker clearing. The confined spaces of Japanese bunkers and pillboxes created exactly the same tactical situation as WWI trenches: close range. No time for precision shooting, overwhelming firepower required. The Marines loved them. One famous photograph from Okinawa shows a Marine carrying a Model 1897 with hash marks carved into the stock, each mark representing a bunker cleared. The Germans, facing American forces once again, didn't bother protesting this time. They'd learned their lesson. But it wasn't just combat where the shotgun proved its worth. Military police units used them for base security. Navy shore parties used them for boarding actions and anti-piracy work. Even the U.S. Coast Guard employed them for rum runner interdiction during Prohibition, which overlapped with the interwar years. John Moses, Browning himself, never saw the full impact of his creation. He died in 1926 at his workbench in Herstal, Belgium. Still designing firearms at age 71, his legacy includes over 128 firearms patents: the 1911 pistol, the Barr Browning automatic rifle, the M2.50 caliber machine gun, the Auto-5 shotgun, and dozens more. But the Model 1897 holds a special place in that legacy. It wasn't his most technically advanced design. It wasn't his most commercially successful, but it might be the one that had the most immediate, visceral impact on combat. The gun remained in production until 1957, a 60-year production run that saw over 1 million units manufactured. Today, original WWI trench guns are highly sought-after collector's items, with authentic examples selling for $3,000 to $8,000, depending on condition and provenance. The slamfire featured that defect that made the gun so deadly in combat became a selling point for civilian models marketed for home, defense, and law enforcement. Modern shotgun designs deliberately incorporated disconnectors to prevent slamfire. It's now considered a safety issue for civilian use. But the tactical advantage of that rapid-fire capability influenced the development of semi-automatic shotguns and even modern fully automatic shotguns like the AA-12. As for the German protest, it became a footnote in military history, a curiosity studied by law students examining the evolution of international humanitarian law. The 1907 Hague Convention's prohibition on weapons causing unnecessary suffering remains in force, but the standard for what constitutes unnecessary has evolved. Modern militaries use far more devastating weapons than buckshot, white phosphorus, thermobaric explosives, depleted uranium penetrators, and the international legal framework struggles to keep pace. The shotgun protest of 1918 revealed an uncomfortable truth. In war, inhumane often just means too effective for the other side's comfort. So what do we take away from the story of the trench gun? First, that innovation doesn't always come from complexity. Browning's slamfire feature wasn't a sophisticated electronic system or a revolutionary new material. It was the absence of a part. Sometimes the best design isn't about adding, it's about subtracting the unnecessary. Second, that context is everything. The Model 1897 was a good hunting shotgun. Nothing revolutionary about it in civilian use, but drop that exact same weapon into the specific tactical environment of trench warfare, and it became a war-winning tool. The weapon didn't change. The environment revealed what it could do. Third, and this is where the story gets philosophically interesting, that military innovation is often driven by desperation rather than planning. The U.S. military didn't commission a study to develop the perfect trench-clearing weapon. They grabbed whatever was available, tested it in the field, and discovered it worked. Some of the most important military technologies in history, from the aircraft carrier to the machine gun to the tank, emerged from pragmatic improvisation rather than deliberate design. But there's a darker lesson here. The German protest, for all its hypocrisy, wasn't entirely wrong about the nature of buckshot wounds. They are horrific. The shotgun is devastating precisely because it's designed to destroy flesh in the most efficient way possible at close range. The fact that it worked so well in combat doesn't make it any less brutal. We like to think of technological progress in warfare as somehow making combat cleaner, more precise, more humane. Smart bombs instead of carpet bombing, drones instead of mass infantry assaults. But the reality is messier. Every weapon that makes killing easier also makes war more terrible for those on the receiving end. The trench gun is a perfect example. It saved American lives, there's no question about that. Soldiers equipped with shotguns had higher survival rates in close quarters combat than those without. But it also meant the German soldiers died in new and terrible ways. History doesn't offer us clean moral lessons, just complicated ones. What we can say with certainty is this: John Browning's simple pump-action shotgun, with its defective lack of a trigger disc, changed the tactical calculus of close quarters combat in a way that echoed for decades. It proved that, in war, as in so much else, the right tool in the right place at the right time can shift the balance of power completely. When German pilots climbed into their fighter planes equipped with synchronized machine guns, when British tank crews rumbled across no man's land in their armored behemoths, when American soldiers charged into trenches carrying pump shotguns, they were all wielding tools that redefined what was possible on the battlefield. Some of those tools we celebrate, some we condemn. Some, like the trench gun, we remember with a mixture of admiration for the engineering and acceptive discomfort at the human cost. But we remember them all, because, in the end, the story of the impossible shotgun that cleared bunkers in seconds isn't really about a weapon. It's about how human ingenuity, for better and worse, constantly finds new ways to solve old problems, even when those problems involve killing each other more efficiently. The Winchester Model 1897 trench gun sits in museums now, behind glass, carefully preserved. Collectors bid thousands for original examples. Historians write papers analyzing its impact. And somewhere in the collective memory of warfare, German soldiers from 1918 still hear that distinctive sound echoing through the trenches. CHKCHK, boom, CHKCHK, boom, the sound of the trench broom, sweeping history clean.